and to start, I want to take a moment just to welcome everybody here tonight. Tonight is our July 14th, 2014 work session. And our work sessions are more informal setting to update the council on business items. No votes will be taken on any items tonight. Tonight we've got 7 items on our agenda. Public comment is allowed that is germane to an agenda item. If you wish to speak, you're required to fill out a public comment card and turn it into our city clerk over here. Public comment will be allowed for a total of 10 minutes per agenda item and no more than 2 minutes per person. Public comment will be heard at the beginning of each item, and once that item is called, no other public comment will be accepted, or cards will be accepted. I will say if we have several people that want to speak on something, I'll be glad to, along with the council, get permission to extend time to make sure everyone has an opportunity to speak. So, Sudie, we'll start with our item number 1. Do we have any public comment on it?
I do not.
Okay.
Sure.
Well, then, if you wouldn't mind sounding that agenda item, and we'll move forward.
Our first item is presentation of MARTA's Georgia 400 Transit Initiative update. We'd like to welcome Mark Eatman, Janadai Sidafal, and Claudia Bellotto with MARTA.
Hey, good evening. My name is Mark Eatman. I'm with MARTA. First of all, I just want to thank the City of Milton Council for having us here tonight. But we just wanted to come and give you guys a brief update on some of the work that we've been working on with the Connect 400, Georgia 400 Transit Initiative. So just for the sake of time, I'll just go through these slides here for you. We just want to talk about, where we are in the process with the study. We also want to go into what we've heard from citizens and feedback that we've received throughout the process so far. And also we want to talk about what's next following the activities that we have planned this summer. So looking at this slide, it gives you showed a glimpse into the project status, where we're at. This current planning effort started in 2011, and we finished an alternatives analysis in 2013. And last fall in 2013, we also finished what was called early scoping, and that was a phase 1 of early scoping, which is just an optional comment period that the Federal Transit Administration, has allowed, in their processes for us to do, and to get more feedback on the project. And at the completion of that, we decided that we wanted to do a second phase of early scoping, which is what we're doing this summer. And the colored slide, bubbles at the top there highlight kind of where we're at in the process and where we're going. We're still at that very first bubble where it says early scoping phase 1 and phase 2. Next, we're looking to go into establishing what we call a locally preferred alternative, which is a more refined alternative to then take into NEPA scoping and eventually into doing a detailed environmental review with our agency partners, with GDOT, Federal Transit Administration, and the EPA. And once we complete that, we're looking to enter what's called project development, which then really gets us into finalizing our environmental review for this transit project, and leading into eventually establishing what's called a record decision, or a ROD, between our agency partners and us. So again, and this kind of takes you even beyond what the last slide showed you, which was through 2017, essentially. But as you can see, we're still at the very beginning of this process. After the next, couple years, we'll be getting into preliminary engineering and finalizing our environmental review for this project. Assuming everything goes okay and the feedback we get from everybody is positive, and we can move forward with it. And then once you get into that, we get into the final design work and actual hard engineering of the project, which takes about 1 to 2, 3 years, something like that. And then you actually have to construct the project, which is another 2 to 3 years, depending on the complexity. And then finally, you're into operations. And just to give you a brief overview of where we're at and what the project looks like to date, we have identified the Georgia 400 corridor in some fashion as the preferred alignment, and that would extend from the existing terminus at North Spring Station up to this area, the Windward Parkway area, and it's about 12 miles long. And we're still trying to figure out, which transit technology we want to move forward with, whether it's bus rapid transit, light rail, or heavy rail. So far, it seems to be that heavy rail is the preference, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward through this presentation. And additionally, we're looking at potential station locations. So we're thinking Northridge, Holcomb Bridge, North Point, Old Milton, of course, Windward Parkway, and Mansell. And so those are the kind of the station areas that we're looking at. Some of them can go, some of them will stay. That's kind of where we're at in this process. We don't know yet which ones are set in stone to say. So talking about some of the public outreach that we've done a very extensive amount of public outreach with this project dating back to 2011. We've had over 30-plus stakeholder meetings. We've had numerous public meeting opportunities from 2011 to now into 2014, and we'll continue to have as many public meetings as the people would like us to have. Additionally, we've done 2 surveys. We did one back in the fall of 2012, leading into 2013, and then we're just wrapping up now a more robust survey that has a larger sample size, covers more of the northern portion of Fulton County and hits all the major municipalities up here. And I'll talk about that a little bit in further detail in a second. But just to give you a refresher again on this early scoping phase 1 that we did last fall, the outcomes of that was that it established Georgia 400 as the preferred alternative. And before that, we looked at should we utilize State Route 9? Should we utilize a combination of State Route 9 with Georgia 400? Or should we just use Georgia 400 as our preferred alternative to advance in the planning process? And overwhelmingly, it was abundant through the feedback that we got and the technical analysis that we had done with our planning that Georgia 400 was the preferred location. Additionally, we heard loud and clear that people were just more interested in the project than we, I guess, thought when we went into early scoping, which is why we're doing this phase 2. And we're also doing. It was also the precedent for doing this second survey that I've talked about. So getting into that survey, we worked with Kennesaw State University, and we had a really great time working with them. And it was at the Ale Burse Institute. There, and we had a really healthy sample size of over 1,000 residents and employees combined. And our just to give you some other details about the statistical background of the survey, we had a plus or minus margin of error of 4%, and so it covered a very wide basis up in the northern Fulton County area. So there were 2 components to this survey. One was a resident component and one was a employee component. The resident component surveyed everyone in the northern portion of northern Fulton County. The employee portion looked at a 1-mile distance from the Georgia 400 corridor, and those employees were randomly selected, just like the residents were randomly selected for participation in this survey. And the results that we got were right here before you. And this is just a highlight of and there are many other questions that we asked, and we're going to be posting this online if you want to delve deeper into the documentation and everything in the probably end of this month, early next month. But we asked folks whether they approve or disapprove of an expansion. We heard that roughly 80% strongly, combined, strongly approve or approve of an expansion up to the Windward Parkway area. And this was also very similar. There's a right below the top left pie chart, it shows the employee percentages, if you want to take note of that as well. But the percentages for that were very similar, so the sentiment was kind of the same. And also looking at how should we, do this? How should we expand if we are to expand in the future? And from the resident point of view, heavy rail and light rail were kind of even, with heavy rail coming out slightly on top. And we also we asked, whether we should look at bus rapid transit, in HOV or HOT, high occupancy vehicle or toll lanes, or if it's in some sort of dedicated fixed guideway system. And that seemed to be lower on the list in both the employee and resident portion. But one thing worth noting is that in the employee portion of the survey, the heavy rail component got more support than the light rail component. So now I'm going to turn it over to Claudia, who's going to talk about federal funding opportunities and our next steps in the process.
Thanks, Mark. Good evening, everyone. So I wanted to touch on the federal funding opportunities that we are exploring for potential implementation of the project. This is obviously a really key piece in being able to advance forward, and so we want to be as proactive as possible in making decisions early in the project that could position it for federal funding. The FTA, Federal Transit Administration, has a capital investment grant program that funds about $2 billion per year in several different transit project categories, typically up to 50% of capital costs. It's very difficult to get more than 50% of capital costs. There are three categories: New Starts, which funds projects greater than $250 million in total that need more than $75 million in funding, and that's the category that the alternatives currently under consideration for Georgia 400 would fall into. There's also Small Starts for projects less than $250 million, and Core Capacity, which funds projects that add capacity to an existing system. So that would be more for the existing MARTA rail lines. So the important thing to know is it all comes from the same big pot of $2 billion. And it's discretionary. So basically the feds decide based on a number of criteria who gets the funds. And it's very competitive because not only are we competing with other transit projects in the region, we're competing with other transit projects across the country. So because of that, we're doing an early evaluation of the criteria that FTA considers so that we can see right now where the project performs strong and where we could make tweaks that it might perform better in the future. Those categories include mobility improvements, which is basically a measure of ridership, cost effectiveness, which looks at cost per rider, congestion relief, environmental benefits, such as a reduction in vehicle miles traveled in the region, land use and economic development, which they consider both population and employment densities and policies that are in place to encourage transit-oriented development and incentives to encourage transit-oriented development. So that would be zoning policies that are in place, economic development plans that may have action items that would help support transit ridership, or even financial incentives and the existence of organizations like CIDs that can help implement. So we looked at this preliminarily and already have some idea of how the project might perform in its current state. So we looked at the three technologies still under consideration, and this is on a point scale 1 to 5, where 2.5 basically equates to a score of medium, and you have to have a medium to qualify for financial funds. So we have some areas where the project would already qualify in its current state, and there are some in need of improvement. And then that bottom row, the project justification rating, gives you an overall idea of performance. So right now, Bus Rapid Transit and Heavy Rail both have a score of medium. And as the study continues and the project is refined, we'd expect that rating to get better, particularly in the areas of land use and economic development. Much of the change that would go to support those scores becomes more refined when a project is real. So you're more likely to have transit-oriented development policies in place if you know that a transit corridor has been identified and is coming to certain locations. There is also an economic analysis underway that is being conducted by the Atlanta Regional Commission. It's looking at the economic impact not only of the Georgia 400 project, but also of the other two transit expansion studies that are going on in the region, I-20 East and Clifton Corridor. So that will basically result in a report that shows the influence it will have on the economy in terms of population, jobs, GDP, and that's expected to be completed later this month. So that'll be another technical point we can use for analysis moving forward. We are in the midst of our early scoping phase 2 activities. So we have reinitiated public meeting efforts so we can get more information on alignment, technology, potential station locations, and phasing. All of the information you've seen tonight is preliminary. In order to identify what a locally preferred alternative might be, we want to continue reaching out. That's also, of course, why we're here tonight. And we'll be meeting with the other city councils impacted by the project as well. We've had really great turnout at our first 2 public meetings that were held last week, and we have another public meeting planned for this Thursday, July 17th, at the Hampton Inn in Sandy Springs. So our next steps are to identify a locally preferred alternative that would actually pick a technology to continue exploration of, and as well as the alignment. We hope to do that based on all of the feedback we get during early scoping combined with the technical analysis. The MARTA board would be presented with that information and ultimately choose to adopt an LPA. We'll also continue to explore our funding opportunities to complete the New Starts analysis. In order to advance this project, we have to have a realistic financial plan that has commitments. So that's a process that can take a long time and one that we want to start early in building partners and champions. If we have excitement and people really want to see the project implemented, then it becomes a lot easier to identify potential funding sources. And once there's an LPA, we can also officially initiate the environmental process, which we expect would be an environmental impact statement. Assuming that an LPA is adopted this fall, we would initiate that process later this year, and it would begin with an extensive public outreach component that would then continue through the course of the effort that would be expected to last for about 1.5 to 2 years before we would achieve the ROD. So with that, we are here to take any questions that you might have.
Hey, Matt?
50% funding would be by the grant. Where's the other 50% come from?
So the other 50% would have to come from some sort of local component. So whether that is, some sort of local tax or, that's something that we would have to look in the future. And we actually have a study going on to look at different project delivery methods such as like design build or using some sort of public-private partnership, things of that nature. So we're looking at the whole gamut here of what the other 50% or potentially more would have to be. So
Mainly asking whether cities would help fund or
it could be cities, it could be
whatever.
It could be community improvement districts. It could be like a rental car tax. We're looking at a wide range of things. Yeah, but nothing is obviously set in stone for that. Yeah. Any other questions?
Anybody else have any questions? Bill?
Who and what is the funding available at this point in time to do the preliminary studies?
The studies that we're undertaking right now, MARTA is fully funding those out of our capital program. So, does that answer your question? Or?
Partly.
Okay.
What do you anticipate the full design development phase is going to be, cost-wise?
That we don't really know, and once we get through the environmental process, once we identify the impacts and things we need to mitigate, as we advance the project through environmental. So it's a little too early to say what that would be. But MARTA is committed to it's preliminary engineering, correct? Yeah, preliminary engineering that phase. So after preliminary engineering, once you get into actual final design and things like that, that would have to be that wouldn't be funded by MARTA out of their capital program. So.
That was last. Do you anticipate doing this whole project, the entire 12 miles in one phase, or would you phase it going up 400?
That's actually something that we've been asking the public, their opinion on in this early scope in phase 2 in our public meetings, the ones that we had last week and the one that we have this week, and so we're looking at not only phasing of potentially the constructability of the project, like say you built it from North Springs up to the North Point area or to Holcomb Bridge, and then had a phase 2. We're looking at those considerations, but we're also looking at phasing potentially of technology. Say if you started off with bus rapid transit and then upgraded up to heavy rail, because bus rapid transit might be a little bit more cost effective to do, and you can implement it in the more near term. But then long term, you could be looking at heavy rail potentially. So that phasing component is something we're actively looking at.
You mentioned staying within the 400 corridor.
Yeah.
Would that be within the 400 existing right-of-way, or would you have to purchase additional right-of-way going?
That's, again, we would have to look further in the environmental, but one of the things that we have that's great with this planning effort as opposed to previous ones that we did 10, 15 years ago is that we're actively working with the GDOT to secure 40 to 60 feet of their existing right-of-way. So it would greatly diminish the amount of impacts that we would have to take in any acquisition, or it would cut down on noise and even aesthetics and things like that. So that for us, that's a huge, and it's a win-win, I think, for GDOT and MARTA as well. So
would you anticipate this would be going up the center line of the right-of-way, or would it be off to one side?
At this point, it's looking like it's going to be either on the east or west side, or a combination of switching back and forth. And that's really what we're trying to get out of the public comment period right now. To go up the middle, you would have to you would have to widen the road to create a median wide enough for the trains, or the other option to either tunnel or to bridge would just bring the costs through the roof, and it wouldn't perform well in the new starts rating and all that. So it would most likely now with what we're analyzing, it would be on either the east or the west side, or a combination of the two. So.
And GDOT also has plans is looking at implementing managed lanes down the center of the interstate. So they've asked that wherever they are, we not be. So we're either looking on the east or the west, or a combination of both.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
Okay. Well, thank you guys for having us. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me, or send an email to the Connect 400 email itself. We have a Facebook page. We have a lot of different opportunities you can get in contact with us.
Okay,
So
well, and thank you
Thanks.
all for being here and updating us.
yes, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
I think I'm supposed to give this to.
Mr. Mayor, respectfully, I just received a public comment card on this item,
Okay.
and that's from Mr. Walter Recuck.
All right. Gonna be all right.
Good evening. I think MARTA's long overdue up in this area. I guess they've
Excuse me,
been.
Mr. Recuck.
Excuse me, my name's Walt Recuck at 615 Scarlet Oak Trail. MARTA's been talking about going up 400 as long as I've been living in this community in North Fulton, since the early 80s, and they predicted to be up here within 20 years. So that's 2000. Now we're 2014. One of the concerns I have, I know on their list of potential areas, is stopping at Windward. I'm really concerned that being the last station on a route could add a lot of traffic that you may or may not be expecting, because of being Forsyth County's impact point as well as Cherokee County's. So I think an important point that we need to ask them to study is, could they do something like a North Springs exit point, just like they did at North Springs, I believe, is the exit. So is that a possibility to look at that? Because that could be an impact point. Also looking at the managed lanes, I don't know if many of you went to the managed lanes program, but they are talking about widening the road. and having those managed lanes, but also the managed lanes would have special exit and entrance points onto 400. Again, we need to be thinking about where those locations are in reference to any potential exit or entrance point to this potential station. Another big impact that I can foresee is no different than what's happening at North Springs, where you have a good bit of people getting off, and then you're also having a lot of walkers, and you're going to have a lot of taxis, buses, and other things trying to get people from point A to point B. So to make sure that we have the pedestrian input to get those things arranged. And as was mentioned lastly, if the station doesn't go all the way up to Windward and they decide, oh, we're going to put a park and ride, well, the same situation applies like it does at Mansell. There you have a park and ride, and again, you've got impact for people getting off and getting onto the station. So I think all those are very valid points. I am very disappointed that there are no points in which they have any meetings planned for up in this area, because we're majorly impacted by what Forsyth County could add to our ridership, as well as Cherokee County. And I would say any future times they have meetings, I would certainly ask if they could consider having some locations further north. It's great having them in Sandy Springs, but you already got your stations there for the most part. You may have one station there, but the majority of them are going to be north of the Chattahoochee. So let's concentrate our locations for potential meetings further north. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comment?
That's all for that item, sir.
Okay. Thank everybody on this topic. Now, Sudie, if you don't mind calling the next item.
We do have two public comments for this next item. Our first comment comes from Brenda Hemphill. And this is discussion of Highway 9 cross-section corridor.
Hi, can you hear me? My name is Brenda Hemphill. My business address is 12960 Highway 9, and I came and spoke to you a couple of weeks ago about what my comments were when we initially saw the GDOT plan. We have talked to neighbors, and in some cases found out a lot of the neighbors really weren't aware that because this project is so far out, that activity needs to happen now before they finalize a plan. So we've been knocking down on doors and sending mail and whatever just to let all our neighbors on Highway 9 know about this. And one of the things I just wanted to add, which will be a shock to you because I'm going to try to do this under 2 minutes, is the one thing I'd like to ask you today is we have to have Milton City Council guide, direct, influence GDOT, and we can't do it without you. We've been out there looking at these things one at a time, and the long story short is if Milton per se doesn't gather us together and along with you try to influence GDOT on what would be best for the city and the vision, we won't be able to do it.
Thank you. All right, Sudie, who's our next public comment?
Our next public comment comes from Rich Kernan.
Hi, my name is Rich Kernan. I own Kids Are Kids, which is a large preschool at 13950 Highway 9 North. I think most business owners think expanding Highway 9, that sounds pretty good. In fact, the business that we've talked to, thank God, the traffic's horrendous. This is terrific. We drove up and down Highway 9. We saw the big signs GDOT posted. You're going to widen the road. This sounds terrific. And then you mentioned that, well, as part of this project, they're going to build a 24-foot wide raised median down the center with very limited number of brakes, which will prevent left turn into your business or left turn out of your business. And the reaction is, wait, what? What? No, I thought I loved this project, but you're telling me what? So I guess a couple of points is that it's going to be a really big impact, positive, negative, and everywhere in between. Let's really make sure, besides a sign posted on the side of the road, that we're going to widen Highway 9, that those impacted by it, residents, business owners alike, understand specifically what the impacts are. So if we were going to build, rezone for a senior center or build a billboard or something like that, the residents in that area, property owners, would get a letter in the mail which would say, here's specifically what's going to happen, here's the information, and please come give your input. That doesn't happen in a GDOT project. They just post signs on the side of the road. There was a meeting here. There was pretty good attendance, but I think there's probably decent awareness. They're going to widen Highway 9 and a general feeling that that's a good thing. But the devil's in the details on this one. So for my business in particular, I have 150 families, maybe 200 families every single day coming in on their way to work and coming out on their to pick their truck on the way home. And to have to go past, make a U-turn, turn right in, and then turn right out, make a U-turn, and make back to their homes, that's going to be a mess. So you guys have been up and down Old Milton Parkway. How many times you've look on your Google Maps, so there's the business I'm looking for. I got to drive past it. I got to find a place to make a U-turn. Even myself, I think to myself, you know what, I'll just go to the next block and find something else. So let's just make sure that the sort of boilerplate solution that GDOT proposes in all these projects right now, which is that 2 lanes and bike paths, which I'm not saying are a bad thing, but the standard one-size-fits-all raised median, the entire length of the project, let's really think about, is that the best solution to the given problem we're trying to solve? 2 lanes will double throughput, right? There's 1 lane each way now. 2 lanes will double throughput. So if there is some issue we're trying to solve, a problem we're trying to address, let's focus on characterizing that problem first and then look at this median as a potential solution or not. But just snapping our fingers and saying, here's the plan, here's the median, without consideration of the impacts, I'm concerned. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, do we have any other public comment on this?
And the next comment comes from Richard Bogner.
Good evening. My name is Rich Bogner. I'm the owner of CJ's Talk of the Town. Along with my wife, we're at 13083 Highway North. That's at the Deerfield Place Shopping Center. And obviously, my concern, for us is that we're a new business, and I know this project isn't going to happen for many years. But as a small business, something like this could really impact us where we could go out of business. We're a small retail store. And I think the question that I have here is that, GDOT has probably, done this many, many times. And I'm just wondering if we could ask them to put together a plan that we could see up front where they've gone into other communities and they've done something similar where you have a lot of small businesses up and down the street, and they've showed where they've actually put a plan together so that they're not, preventing, customers from turning in and out of businesses, and that before we sign off on anything, that, we're taking a look at 2, 3, or 4 options that they could put on the table, and that we get the option to say, okay, we think this might be the best possible one for us. Okay, so we're very concerned about this, and so we're hoping, that you are going to look at what we're up against on a daily basis, just running a business, and that you're going to look out for the better, side of it for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And our last comment this gentleman would like it read into the record. That's Mr. Ben Browning at 13895 Hopewell Road, Milton, Georgia. The widening of Highway 9 will have dire consequences on my business. I am the store manager of North Fulton Feed and Seed. The proposed median will not allow ease of access for my business. Our customers will be forced into taking a possible dangerous U-turn at 2 busy intersections. Highway 9 needs expansion, but not at the risk of Milton businesses losing precious revenue. The City of Milton should allow its small businesses to grow alongside the city. This proposal needs to be re-examined with Milton businesses in mind. Thank you. And that is all the public comment.
Okay. And before we allow Mr. Lucas to get started, well, we typically would not have dialogue going back and forth with public comment and a presentation, but Carter, if you wouldn't mind maybe in your presentation, address some of the concerns that are brought up, i.e., one, the median being brought in and access to businesses. Two, maybe the communication in the meetings with property owners and whatnot. Also, if we can discuss what the city can do, we cannot do with GOT, and how we can best help out and all work together for that and that process in your experience. So, and if there's anything else, please add in. But again, if you can try to address some concerns there. Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, that's it. To the extent that we can, we certainly will. All of that was a good segue into this presentation. The Georgia 400 and the importance of transportation within the corridor is an important part of this discussion tonight, and all of those were some really good comments. One thing that's particularly important regarding those comments and any other comments that we get on this project is that, unlike our local projects, this is a GDOT-sponsored project, and so it's very important that any of those comments get to GDOT and are submitted to GDOT for their review. And at the end of the presentation here, we'll give you the project manager's name and who that information needs to go to, so that all of those comments can be considered as they work forward in this design. So as we mentioned, this is a GDOT-sponsored project. This is a project that, while it's in Milton, is a much bigger project. It's a project that extends all the way from Upper Hembry Road to State Road 20 in Cumming. It's actually 7 different projects, with our project being the last one programmed in this overall phase. And from this exhibit, you can see the importance of this particular corridor from a regional standpoint. It's a parallel corridor to 400, and as we talked about mass transit initiatives early on in this meeting, this corridor is really the only relief to Georgia 400 from a vehicular standpoint. And so widening of the corridor and increasing the capacity and level of service along this in this region is vitally important to GDOT. We can see from the traffic counts that we have now, right now, we're looking at anywhere from 17,000 to 22,000 cars per day just in the area of Milton. When we look out to the design year of 2042, you can see almost a 45% increase in traffic volumes are anticipated, given current growth rates, which I think they're using somewhere around the neighborhood of 1.3% on those growth rates. So 25,000 to 32,000 cars a day is what's being anticipated in the design year of 2042. As was mentioned, it is a long construction schedule and design schedule. They're looking to complete the concept report here late this year. The environmental studies will begin and are anticipated to be completed in 2016. And once those are completed, there will be another public hearing that GDOT will hold. And all of these are based on their standard procedures. This is what they go through on most of their typical projects. Right-of-way then would begin in 2019. There is an opportunity, depending on the results of the environmental studies, that could be moved up, but it's currently programmed for 2019. And then construction to begin in 2022 with a completion in 2024. So to give you a little bit of background on really how we kind of got to this point, I wanted to go back and review a lot of the studies that had been done along this corridor through the city, the input that had been received from various stakeholders and community groups through that process, and all of this information that we provided to GDOT so that they could use a lot of the work that had been done within the community previously to build on developing their current cross-section. When we talked about the cross-section, we're talking about a complete streets type development. So this is one that helps not only vehicular but pedestrian, bicycles, and other forms of transportation along the corridor. Most of this started back with the development of our transportation master plan back in 2009. And that was really a big picture of the overall transportation components within the city. And it identified widening this corridor to 4 lanes. And to the extent in the overall plan, that's really as far as the CTP went. So that was really kind of a big picture of road and transportation improvements throughout the city that they were recommending. The exception to Highway 9 was a section from Bethany Bend up to the Forsyth County line, where we began to look at a pilot study on access management within the Highway 9 corridor. And this becomes important both from an operational standpoint when we're looking at the volumes of traffic that we have on what is essentially a two-lane road now, as well as a safety standpoint from pedestrian as well as vehicular safety throughout the corridor. And so what this study started to do was to look at ways to consolidate entrances, control access to various properties, and to promote interparcel access along the corridor. And so while you see on this particular exhibit there's no raised median proposed, it did begin to look at control through a gored median or flush median along that corridor, really utilizing the existing section out there with 2 travel lanes. So that's where we really began to see a need for controlling access along the corridor to improve both the operational characteristics and the safety. Also that came out of that, and there's a lot of information on this slide, but really the important piece is in the upper right-hand corner of each of these exhibits. And what it's intended to show is that the more you begin to control the access, the safer the corridor begins to become. And so where you have full median openings at the very top every 200 feet, we've talked about this in some of our intersection projects, we end up with 126 different major conflict points and 140 minor conflict points. So those conflict points are really anywhere that you can begin to have accidents occurring. When you get all the way down to the raised medians and you really control the access in and out of businesses and access points, we're talking 36 major conflict points and 60 minor conflict points. And that just is really to illustrate the safety component of it. As we began to develop our studies, we looked at the Highway 9 guidelines, which is one that was developed. That was really to look at most of the aesthetics along the corridor, and it started to talk about interparcel access and how we could better control access along the corridor given the existing conditions that are out there. So that typical section began to look at, you still had 2 through lanes, along with some turn lanes and operational improvements down through that existing corridor as it is today. In 2011, we had the North Fulton Transportation Master Plan that was developed, and this was really a precursor to the TIA referendum that was voted on in 2012. And this study was involved, we were involved with all the cities of North Fulton to kind of look at projects that were more regional in nature. So while there were some components that were very specific to each city, the intent was to look at those projects which may span various municipalities, various counties, those corridors that were far more regional in nature than our local projects. And that's where we began to see the typical section developed where there was a more controlled access down through that corridor with a raised median and the widening and the addition of some pedestrian characteristics and bicycle characteristics through sidewalks and bike lanes. Then in 2012, we developed the LCI that again looked at this corridor from a regional standpoint and talked about widening it from 2 to 4 lanes, but really didn't get into any discussion on the typical section that was required through there. From GDOT's perspective, as we look at these projects, this is what they're looking at. One is the complete streets and providing those sections that were usable for various types of modes of transportation, whether it's bicycles, pedestrians, vehicles, all down that corridor. Their policy says that you need to begin to provide facilities for all of them: bike lanes, sidewalks, wider sidewalks, multi-use trails, and vehicular access. And so here's their guidelines. When they start looking at vehicles in the base year, which would be our current year, more than 18,000 vehicles per day, they're going to want to start to look at some sort of median, whether it's a flush median or raised median. And again, in the design year, 24,000 vehicles per day. So we're at those thresholds. In some locations along the corridor, we're closer than others. And I think GDOT's perspective has been that in those that are very close, they could have some discussion on where the raised median versus a flush median may be located. But they are going to be designed to complete streets, and it will be a 4-lane section down through there. And so that's the typical section that was presented at the public information hearing back in May of this year. May 21st, I believe, is when we had that meeting. And they tried to incorporate, what they did was they went ahead and increased our pedestrian and bicycle abilities on this road. The typical section with the 2 lanes and the divided median is one that's kind of held through the development of this project to date, but they did increase the sidewalks, multi-use trails, as well as grass medians to really bring it into more to conformance with the vision that was created through both the LCIs and the CTP. So we've got wider sidewalks instead of on-street bike lanes and the larger grass median. When we get into the 35 and 45 mile an hour speed limits, I think people become more comfortable the further away they get from the travel lanes. So we try to give them a little bit more on that grass median. We're also looking at this as a potential component of the trail connection that we have to the Big Creek Greenway. That's a completely separate project, but related to this in some ways. And so we want to make sure that we don't preclude ourselves from including this section in that trail study as we move forward with that one too. So when we talk about some of the public involvement that GDOT had, back on May 21st, we held the public information hearing here at City Hall. Had 101 attendees, which was really good attendance for these types of meetings, and historically much better than what we've seen in some of the other projects. Out of those, GDOT received 27 comments. 12 were opposed to it in some way, 9 were in support, and 6 were conditional. And so they've used that to really kind of gauge the level of support of the community and level of input. So it's incredibly important from this point forward that anyone who has comments, positive, negative, whatever they may be, get those comments to GDOT so they can be included in their overall matrix. We talked about what types of advertising that was done for this particular meeting. Static signs were installed throughout the corridor to try and identify or try and help people realize the meeting. Advertisements were done in the Milton Herald. We did an e-blast in conjunction with the intersection project at Bethany Bend and Highway 9 that we did. And City Calendar and GDOT had some information on their website. So that was really the extent of the notification that GDOT did for this particular project. One other thing that we did, and so GDOT's question on their survey card was, do you support the project? And really, to me, that means, do you support the project as it was presented at the PIOH, was with the typical section that was shown on with the raised median? And that's what those numbers are, the 12 opposed, 9 in support, and 6 conditional. We did a concurrent public information meeting with the Highway 9 Bethany Bend intersection project, and we asked a slightly different question. And the question was, do you support the widening of State Route 9? With no details on the typical section that was proposed. And the results of that, we got a lot of input from that. So we had 71 in support of widening 9 versus 20 not in support. And this exhibit gives you an idea about where those responses were coming from with our survey question. So you can see that we did get a lot of information or a lot of feedback from people along that corridor without necessarily getting into the details of what typical section GDOT was proposing, because ours was really related more to the intersection when we did our survey questions. And so tonight what we wanted to do is, given some of the feedback that we've heard up to this point, was we really wanted to come to present where GDOT was at this particular moment, provide an opportunity to get the contact name and information out there so that if people have additional comments, they can make sure they get those to GDOT, and then get some feedback from council on how you would like to move forward with them. Ultimately, I think we would want to put together a resolution that asks GDOT to either look at some things or offer support or provide some input to GDOT from a city's perspective about what we think of the overall project. And really, from what I've heard to date, the major question is going to be, how does the raised median or flush median work throughout this corridor, and what opportunities are there for us to look at modifying that to suit our needs. And so with that, I'd like to take any questions or hear any comments or feedback on that.
Yeah, just a comment. I personally would like to see that we can work together with not only the comments that, I know so far the comments we've gotten, we've passed on to GDOT, but also, as you said, with a resolution and, somehow be cohesive with the majority of our citizens want and what we think is good for the area. But also we have to do it in a way that working together is not only a team, but also a team with the GDOT. For example, we have to be careful. We're fortunate the school board of education typically will listen to us and take feedback and work with us. But there's a point where we're not driving this bus, so we have to be there helping out, but not trying to block something to where then they won't listen to us at all, and kind of get the opposite effect that we'd like to have. So I don't know if you've got any suggestions or can be thinking about that, as well as the rest of our staff, on what we can do moving forward so that we not only pass on individual feedback, but also as what would appear to be, the major concerns that the city of Milton would have.
Well, I think GDOT's always willing to listen to the communities as we move forward with this. We've had a vision for that Highway 9 corridor here for a while, and we've developed that through the LCI and a couple of other studies. And I think that the access is really a balance that we have to look at. The aesthetics of the corridor that we've developed through the architectural design guidelines and the form-based codes certainly is something that I think we want to consider. Just like that, the transportation components also have an opportunity to develop some of the aesthetics throughout the corridor. And so I think we want to be careful in how we move forward. We certainly want to look at the access that's available to the businesses there and make sure that they have the access that they need to be successful. At the same time, it's really an opportunity to develop a look and feel along this corridor that I think is important for this section of town. Just to throw out a few statistics, and this is kind of where GDOT's going to be coming from. When they look at the raised medians, some of the studies that they've done, particularly on their facilities, when they've installed a raised median, there have been 78% fewer pedestrian fatalities, 15% reduction in vehicle crashes, 30% decrease in delays and increase of capacity. And so what they have seen in the past from an operational standpoint, a safety standpoint, is there have been great improvements along these corridors where they've done the medians. I am sure that they could come in and also give you some background and some studies on the business aspects and what they've seen from businesses as far as their success following the installation of these medians. I think we have to be a little bit careful when we compare the median to the conditions that exist today with what's going to be there. It is a little bit different, and the safety aspects and characteristics of that highway with 4 lanes versus 2 is really a completely different thing. And so where we may have concerns and issues with access today, those will be increased as we add additional lanes and capacities and volumes along the corridor. So if one of the things we want to do is to have some information from GDOT regarding some of the studies that they may have done in the past along these corridors, we can certainly do that. We can provide that information on our website or links to that information and get that out to everybody, or even possibly bring them back in to a later work session to discuss some of those things with you all. I don't know if I answered anything out of that all or not, but
good points. And one of them being that we can't compare with what the road looks like today versus what it will look like. But Joe?
Yeah, just to sort of add on to that, I mean, this is going to be one of those issues that there's going to be a lot of opinion on both sides, and so trying to figure out. I mean, it's nice being on the council because we have a certain amount of information that's automatically given to us, so we don't feel like we're in the dark on anything. I can't say that holds true for everybody. Certainly, anything that we can make available on the website is going to be a plus, but I think that in this particular case, we need to probably take another step and maybe offer some access to resources, whether it's regularly scheduled meetings or facilitate meetings that our citizens want to have for, whichever side of the fence they happen to sit on, because I guarantee you, like I said, it's not going to be a one-sided issue. So, and certainly our citizens probably feel that if the city of Milton asked GDOT to come up and talk about a particular topic, it might have more weight than if a citizen group asks the same thing. So in terms of helping facilitate any kind of meetings with GDOT, like you mentioned, Carter, I think that'd be a great idea. And let's just make sure we give as much access as we can to whatever, resources or information that we've got for whatever group, is interested in how this is going to turn out, which I can imagine it's going to be quite a few. So.
Anybody else? Bill?
A couple things, Carter. In the past, there was scuttlebutt about GDOT rerouting Highway 9 up West Side Drive and Deerfield. Is that completely off the table now?
I don't know that anything is ever completely off the table with GDOT. I think that has been one that we haven't necessarily supported because of its potential impact to Deerfield. I have not heard any discussion of that recently, but I don't know that anything's ever off the table with them.
Well, the flip side of that, too, it would take business traffic off of the Highway 9 corridor down through our commercial district. Another issue, too, the interchange at McGinnis Ferry 400 has been talked about, and I think it's passed state legislature as far as funding.
To some
do
degree.
you see where that's going to be a concurrent project with this one?
They're trying to push that forward a little bit ahead of this one. And you'll probably see some information on that coming forward here in the next month or two. We've had some meetings with them recently trying to move that forward and fast-track that a little bit. They have gotten their interchange justification report completed and approved, so that's the first big step in moving that forward. They've begun to reach out to the involved communities, Alpharetta, ourselves, the CID, to look at the concept plan and look at potentially how we move that forward from a funding standpoint. And so while they have gotten some of the funding, they're looking for some additional local funding to help move that forward. And I would imagine probably within the next month or two we'll bring something forward to you so you can see the progress of that particular project.
I'd like to see their study insofar as the traffic count implications during this section here once that interchange is constructed.
Me too.
Okay. Anything else, Karen?
The divided median, raised median, does allow for a lot more traffic, and I know that they are safer, and they work out real well as long as you have the interparcel access so people can get to the businesses. Because people will cut through if they know there's interparcel access. They're not necessarily going to ever make a U-turn to go to a business. I know some of our businesses do have good interparcel access, others do not have it. Even though I know Fulton County has had a policy in place for 20 years to require with zonings the interparcel access. Are we going to do anything to try to, if they do go forward with the raised median, to make sure we do have interparcel access so that all the businesses are accessible?
I don't know that there's a specific plan in place retroactively to address existing businesses. That is certainly something that they could do on their own, but I don't know that there's anything that we have that requires them to do that unless they come back in for redevelopment. So as these parcels begin to redevelop and where those opportunities exist, we certainly do require that interparcel access to be installed.
Because that to me is the real key to making it work, is to have the interparcel access.
That's true, and I think that was kind of the highlight of the LCI and a couple of those other studies to try and make that happen along that corridor.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. Thank you for the public comments, and thank you, Steph. Sudie, we can move on to our next item, and if we do, we have any public comments on item number 3.
We do have one, and our next item is discussion of RZ 14-05 to amend Article 6, Division 23, CUP, Community Unit Plan District. And our comment comes from Mr. Walter Recook.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. My name is Walter Recook. I live at 615 Scarlet Oak Trail. I always look at why is an ordinance being changed or why is an ordinance being amended. Is it making an ordinance, a code better or worse? Some of the best communities that we have in the city are CUPs. You've got Crooked Creek, you've got White Columns, you've got Triple Crown. You've got some of the best ones in the community. The attributes that are in those communities, I do not see being represented in the RR zoning district that's being referred to as being a replacement for it. In fact, in many ways, it's going to be a degradation to any potential developer who wants to develop a good quality community like those three that I just mentioned. The biggest problems that I see are basically changing some of the distances between the sides, minimum front yards, but the biggest thing is the lot coverage, the maximum lot coverage on any lot in this R, and I'll bring this up at the next one, which will be the R2, where this is really discussed more, is 20%. That's very little amount of land, especially if you start talking about a pool, a flag lot, a long driveway, a guest house or a pool house, or for that matter, even having a certain type of other structures. The biggest reason that you went on to a moratorium for CUP was to come up with some type of solution to how you can address CUP. I just don't see what, by just taking the code out, we're really addressing that. The major things that I saw when people did request CUPs was to bring the house close to the street and to minimize the side or rear setbacks for a house, and that way you wound up saving more trees in the back of these homes. And again, I just don't see how we're improving things. And then lastly, under a CUP, keeping a code in the code book, I think, always leaves more flexibility to a community. Someday, someone's going to look at why we don't have a CUP. Well, this is zoned CUP. How come it's now outside the ordinance? What made the change? Why is it not there? And what did it mean under CUP? And if it's not there, sometimes it's hard to understand. Again, I just don't understand why it should be removed. It does give a good option for the future people to use it. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all. That's
right.
all, sir.
We could move forward with this item. Kathy?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. I'm actually going to, with your permission, speak to both the CUP and the NUP coterminously because they're directly related to one another.
Now, just breaking, do we have any public comment on
We do not have any on item 4.
Okay. All right. Everybody okay with council? Okay with that? Yes. All right. Thanks.
Great, thank you. The proposed deletion of the CUP Community Unit Plan District and the NUP Neighborhood Unit Plan District is in response to the zoning moratorium that is currently in place for these two zoning districts. The reasoning behind the proposed deletion of the CUP district for requests to this district in the future is so the staff can guide the development community to a more reasonable development when it involves unsewered areas of the city. Currently, the applicant can request almost any minimum setback, and there is a perception that by drastically reducing the setbacks, the development yields additional lots. In addition, there is a misconception that non-residential and multifamily uses are permitted by right. The CUP district was intended to provide flexibility to a large parcel. A good example is the Crooked Creek subdivision on Highway 9, where there are pods of development with various size parcels and setbacks. This was accomplished through one zoning district instead of the developer requesting various ones to accomplish the same result. Since the city adopted the form-based code for the Crabapple and Highway 9 areas, and will be working on a form-based code for the Arnold Mill area in the next 6 months, they will provide similar flexibility as the CUP did in the past. Staff is proposing a new zoning district, RR, Rural Residential, pursuant to RZ 14-08, which is replacing the existing R2 Residential District. And we believe that this newly created district will be a compromise between the proposed deleted CUP and AG1 district. As part of this memo, staff has included a comparison chart to illustrate this point. And we have submitted a sort of an Excel spreadsheet chart that shows the differences between existing CUP, AG1, and the new proposed RR, which I will talk about shortly. In regard to the NUP Neighborhood Unit Plan, this district requires that the development be a minimum of 4 acres and no larger than 12 acres in size. This is the smaller version of the CUP district. Similar to the CUP, it has historically provided flexibility for smaller tracts of land, but the newly adopted form-based codes provide for this flexibility, and therefore staff is of the recommendation that this district be deleted for future requests of the NUP districts in the future. The Planning Commission recommended approving the deletion of the CUP and NUP zoning districts on June 25, 2014, as recommended by staff. The city attorney recommended that there is need to keep these 2 districts since there are existing zonings within the city. Instead, there is a provision that there shall not be any additional requests for the CUP and NUP zoning districts. So essentially what we did with both the CUP, the existing CUP and the NUP, you'll see on the draft ordinance that we provided to you, is that we allowed for those properties that were originally zoned for either CUP or NUP to be grandfathered in. But the ordinance now reads that after July 21st, no additional property shall be rezoned to the CUP district. We couldn't eliminate all CUPs because we do have some in place. So we needed to have a vehicle by which they were able to remain in place.
Okay.
That is it. Sorry.
All right. Have any questions, comments? Joe?
So, Kathy, so what we're basically saying is that the additional, either the townhouse or the R2 single-family districts are going to be supersets of CUP and NUP, and there's no need to have those anymore. I mean, we can do anything that we could do today with the new ones that we're adding on, and the old ones we can leave around just so that we document what's already in place, but we just keep people from moving in that direction.
That's what we're saying, and the caveat is with the new one that were created, which will be we're going to take the R2 and make it and call it in the future the RR.
Right.
And in essence, that's going to be. It will provide some flexibility, as we did with setbacks in the existing CUP and NUP, but not as much. So the idea was to pull in a little, because I think there was a perception in the community that the flexibility that was being allowed under the CUP and NUP was really allowing more density to be built. And by pulling back in terms of the amount of flexibility allowed, that would not be the case.
So when you say perception, you mean people were applying for that thinking that they were going to get something that they actually couldn't get?
Well, the thought was if you have more flexibility with setbacks, you were able to work around that tree or that rock outcropping or whatnot, that if you had a more stringent requirement, as the AG1 has, that with the AG1 you may end up with less house lots because of the restrictions on the site, whereas if you had the flexibility allowed under a CUP, you could work around those restrictions and then hence gain more yield. And I think that was the discussion that went on.
Okay. Anybody else? Bill?
Kathy, you mentioned Crooked Creek as an example of how the developer exercised discretion and with different setbacks. How did that happen with today's ordinances? Of course, it wasn't developed under our ordinances. It was developed under Fulton County's. How did that all come together then?
Let me turn to our Fulton County zoning expert here, Robin. She would.
Are you asking how could that same kind of development be developed today without the CUP? Is that your question, or how was it done then?
I guess that's what it amounts to. I guess that's where my question lies.
Well, you could still, I mean, there is different size lots. I mean, you wouldn't exactly get that. You would have to probably ask for different zoning districts depending on the size lots. Let's say if they were 12,000 square foot lots, it would be, you know, an R4A, and if it was, you know, a three-quarter acre, that would be an R2A or whatever. So it would take away that flexibility as far as that's concerned. But we are also working on our conservation subdivision, and hopefully that would be another tool in our tool chest that could possibly create something similar to that. Again, that's probably the only situation that we have in the city of Milton where it was, I think the CUP was really used to the extent that it was designed for, where you had pods of different size lots all in one zoning district. And typically most of the other CUPs that were mentioned were 1 acre lots, whether it's White Columns or I can't remember, Kingsley. They're all still 1 acre lots. It doesn't make a difference because of the lack of sewer. So, anyway.
Joe?
So, Robin, if I heard you right, if somebody came in, let's just pretend for a second that there was land available similar to what Crooked Creek developed on, okay? So had access to sewer, so the density issue wasn't necessarily problematic. You're saying we couldn't rezone the land one way and give the developer the flexibility that he needs to develop another Crooked Creek. We would have to split the land up into a bunch of pieces and zone each piece in a different way. Is that what you're saying?
Correct, but at the same time, with our form-based code and how we have the comprehensive plan, we really have no other land left over to do something like that.
Yeah, I understand that.
Anything that wants to be creative, as we stated in the memo, was that we would use the form-based code, and we're looking toward that with Arnold Mill as well as the Highway 9 and the Crabapple area. So there's really nothing left over to really use a true CUP.
Right. So then why are we worried about changing it?
Well, I think what Kathy spoke to was we had a number of applications at the end of last year for a CUP, right. And the perception was that the applicants were trying to yield more lots by getting skinnier side setbacks and smaller front setbacks. And so we're just responding in part to that. And really that's also a bit of history was in Fulton County, to be able to gate a community, you had to have a CUP. So that's why portions of White Columns are CUP. That's why Atlanta National is CUP, is because it allowed them that flexibility to gate it. And for whatever reason, we don't have that rules, or they lifted those rules. So there hasn't been, you know, the same purpose of a CUP as prevalent.
Anybody else? Karen?
I've got several questions. Number one, it says that the maximum height is 2 stories. I mean, I know we have some 3-story houses in Milton, so why are we, is there a reason why we're now limiting the height to 2 stories?
When it speaks to 2 stories, it does not include the basement and does not include the attic. So it's 2 stories. So I think the intent was not to get really super high, huge houses.
And it goes to the bottom of the eaves, so then
Right.
you get the whole attic above that, and it's an average around all 4
So what
sides.
you're saying is really, technically, it's almost 4 stories if you counted your attic space and a basement. So
I think the intent is not to have a true 3-story house. The intent is to have a 2-story, and if you have a basement, that's fine. If you have an attic, that's fine.
And I guess I just don't understand why we're telling people they can't have a 3-story house. If they got 50 acres and they want to build a 3-story house in the middle of it, I mean, I guess I'm not real sure why they can't do that. You know.
They can ask for a variance if that was
Well,
an
but they
exception.
can't ask for a variance, because in order to get a variance under our ordinance, you have to have a hardship. And that, I don't know how you'd have a hardship that said you had to have a 3-story house. So You know, under Fulton County's ordinance, a variance did not have to have a hardship. It had to just be either hardship or else it had to be, you know, in keeping with what was best for the area, whereas our ordinance is our zoning variance ordinance is much stricter, and you have to require hardship that I'm not real sure they can do. What is included where it says lot coverage shall not exceed 20%? What does that mean as far as lot coverage?
So in the last set of text amendments that you all approved, there was a definition for lot coverage, and I apologize, I don't have it right in front of me, but from what I remember, it would be the structure of the house, the footprint, it would be driveways, it would be parking area, it could be a pool, could be other, I believe it included accessory structures like a pool house. I did do various calculations, especially with a 1 acre lot, and you take 20%, you would have to have probably a 6,000 or 7,000 square foot footprint on a 1 acre lot. And then I calculated about 4,000 feet of driveway, and it was still way below. It was like still 14% lot coverage. I think I was very liberal. I will say that in part the reason why we asked for lot coverage was, for instance, in the manor, you calculate their lot sizes could include the right-of-way because it's a private street. Some of the lots include the golf course to the center line. So you net an actual lot of maybe 3/4, not all of the lots, but some of the lots. You could actually net the actual usable lot size of between a 1/2 and 3/4 acre, and then you put this huge house on it. And so the way that we calculated the lot coverage, that's the only area that I would see that you might have a problem with lot coverage is when you don't have a true 1 acre lot.
But if somebody's got a really nice big swimming pool in the back with a little pool house, then sometimes those swimming pools can cover, you know, a pretty good area. If you got a 4,000 footprint and you got a wide driveway and a swimming pool, it seems like you could get close to that 20% pretty easily.
Well, it would have had to been a very large house on 1 acre. I mean, obviously not everybody has just exactly 1 acre. A lot of people have 2 or 3 acres. But it seemed fairly liberal, and just, you know, consulting with other builders and stuff, it seemed like that it was, you know, fairly liberal that you would have the 20%.
Yeah, I tend to, and again, you know more, you know, asking, but to Karen's point, you know, 20% almost sounds to me like it's pretty tight. You know, it's at maybe 86, you know, 100 square feet. Granted, yeah, that an 8,600 square foot footprint for a house would be huge because it's probably going to be 2 or 3 stories. But on the flip side, you add a driveway and other hardscapes. I would think. And again, I'm just asking.
I mean, if I put a pool in my backyard, I think I'd be well over the 20% because my lot is roughly an acre, and if you look at the square footage of the house and the driveway and everything else, I think if I put a decent pool in my backyard, I'd be well over the 20%. I don't even know if I could because I'd be in a creek, but you know, I think that we may want to look at that to make sure where it's not unintended consequences. Now, you mentioned the spreadsheet.
Oh, it's in the memo. Well, we apologize. If you go to the first presentation on your iPad, it's the spreadsheets on the memo.
Okay, so it's not something we have a hard copy of?
No.
Okay.
Not in front of you, no.
Okay.
It's the July 7th.
Oh, so we have to go to July 7th. Okay. Now, it looks like we have a new standard here for open space for recreational facilities. Is that something that's new for any new developments that are going in?
Under that, yes, that's correct. Under these particular districts, yes.
Okay, and what really, for recreational facilities, I guess that includes pools, tennis courts, sports fields, and all that kind of stuff?
Fairly liberal, yes.
And does it include like the parking and all for those things, or?
Yes.
So if you have a development of, say, 100 homes, how many square feet of recreational fields would you, 1,000, would that be 100,000 square feet of,
Yeah, so that would be about
Two and a
a little
half
over
acres?
2 acres.
okay.
So it's 4, 6, maybe 2.25 acres would need to be open space. And it doesn't have to be a pool and tennis courts. It can be split up. It doesn't all have to be in one contiguous. I mean, it needs to be properly divided up. I mean, we don't want a bunch of little pockets of open space that aren't usable, but if it's, fairly substantial, that we'll look to allowing it to be split up.
Okay. And the last question I had is about the mailbox kiosk. I wasn't sure I totally understood that.
Okay, so actually, while I was on vacation, there's going to be additional meetings. Basically, the United States Postal Service is requiring that all new developments do not install individual mailboxes, but they must be ganged mailboxes, kind of like what you see in apartment complexes.
Why are they going out of business? Why are they going out of business again?
Well, and to be honest
So
with
this
you,
is
ganged
addressing
mailboxes
the
really
CUP.
doesn't sound good. I mean, ganged anything doesn't sound good.
Saving gas going on.
That's what technically they're called. So it's just to address the aesthetics of the grouped mailboxes.
Now, when is this, I mean, is this something that's definitely going to go through
It
with
is.
the?
It
Yes.
is.
It
We're
already
telling,
is.
we're telling developers now, as part of their plans, that we need to see an area with a kiosk for their mailboxes.
And we're already hearing about it too.
Yes. Yeah.
And even I think we're having a little difficulty. We have some subdivisions that were developed previously, and now they're continuing on with the next phase. And even I believe
And the
they're
new phases
forcing
have
us.
to be ganged?
Yes.
Oh, man.
Yes.
Okay.
So
No. Not to wander off, but in that situation though, I mean, is there any, do we as a city have any control over that, or is that the U.S. Postal Service and something we have to live with?
I think what I read through the email last week, they claim that there's, you can ask for a variance to it, but it pretty much sounds like they don't want to give any variances. Or
Right. I know the communities and certainly the Atlanta region are meeting on this so that everyone's aware of it. And we're inviting the Postal Service representatives to come for more information. But the communications we've gotten are that it's in place.
Wonder how long it take to get on their agenda.
Okay. Now, was that your last question, Karen?
Yes, it is.
All right. Any more questions?
So can I clarify? So the first two items that Kathy spoke about was basically putting to bed the CUP and NUP, and then there was a lot of questions about the next one. But so are you all in agreement with that? So that when we go to next week's meeting, is that what you want to see before you?
Well, the only change is that we're taking it off the table as an option for somebody to apply to.
Correct.
Right?
Right.
Yes.
That's all we're doing.
Right. I just want to make sure that's.
Thought those were the easier of the two decisions
Right,
that
okay.
we had to make.
I just want to make sure so.
Anybody else?
I understand what you,
You're just talking about just the first two.
just the first two.
Okay.
Yes.
So, which, you're correct, it's only basically not allowing further requests in the future, so. I know there were some questions about that.
I got a little
about Crooked
confused
Creek.
because we drifted in and out of
Exactly.
several different ones.
Yes,
And I
we
thought
did.
we were just talking
Yeah.
about the first two.
Right, so that's why I want to clarify on the first
Yeah.
two, that you all are in agreement with the Planning Commission and staff recommendation?
For the first two.
What's the first two?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, we're just talking about 5 minutes there.
Only one recommendation on each one.
Okay, thank you, Bert. All right, Sudie, if you'll call it next.
Next item is discussion of RZ 1407 to amend Article 6, Division 13, TR, Townhouse Residential District. And I do have a public comment card from Mr. Walter Recook.
Hello, my name's Walt Recook. I live at 615 Scarlet Oak Trail, Milton, Georgia. I am a resident here as well as a business owner. On the TR, again, just like CUP and NUP, I'm not real sure why we're changing that. Again, this is a moratorium involving TR. But again, I see some very good quality townhomes, especially in the Crabapple area and such, that are well over the very first item under height regulation, 28 feet. And again, with most of these houses having a garage, first floor, which basically is the main floor, and then a bedroom on top of it. And most of those are looking to be at least 10-story or 10-foot tall ceilings. You're going to be well above the 28 feet. And again, the old regulation was 40 feet. I just don't understand why. Same thing with the minimum lot width, changing from 20 to 25. Also, I'm not as concerned about the heated area. I think in most cases, the ones that I'm seeing are well above the heated floor area, as well as the frontage area. I don't think that's a problem. But again, when we look at setbacks, they're asking now the setbacks to be changed. And if you look at item I, they're eliminating that. The minimum front yard was 20 feet from the right-of-way, and side yards and such being eliminated. Well, what it means is that your minimum frontage is now going to be 40 feet. So basically, instead of a townhome just typically having basically a car width in front of it, you're going to move it further back. What that's going to mean is those lots are going to become longer and deeper to allow for a townhome. And again, I don't understand why. What makes that better? They also are requiring open space. One of the problems I've got with that requirement is if I read the TR correctly, you can only have 50% of your total land could be in building and parking. So why are you even concerned? If you read item K, that's what it says. 50% of the total land is building and parking. Why are we even asking for more open space or land when we're already getting 50% of the land's going to be open space? And then same thing, why are we reducing the number of dwelling per unit in a single building from 20 down to 6? Maybe it should be 8, maybe it should be 10. But again, if I look at some of those very nice units, both over here not far from City Hall, or for that matter up in Crabapple, some of those are 8 to 10 units in one long building. Again, I just don't quite understand why we're doing this. They're also requiring that a minimum of 80% of the common wall shall be contiguous to each adjoining unit. I'm not sure what that means. They should also provide rear-loaded vehicle access. And again, I think some of these things, it's nice to have, but I just don't understand. I think you're really handcuffing, in some cases, a developer or someone to come up with it. I'm very much in favor of let the person who's going to buy this unit decide it. If we're real concerned about what the outside world is concerned about TR development, then let's make sure they have certain type of landscaping around the exterior. Let's make sure they buffer it, screen it, berm it, whatever. But once they get inside it, I think that's going to be up to the individual property owner who wants to buy those units. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comments?
That's all, sir.
Okay, Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The proposed amendment of the TR Townhouse Residential District is in response to the zoning moratorium that is currently in place for this zoning district. Currently, the way that the district is written, detached single-family residences are permitted. In the past, this has caused confusion with the public. It is assumed that only townhouse products are permitted to be developed. With the proposed amendment, staff has deleted the allowance of detached single-family units to be developed. The existing R-5A residential district provides the comparable district that the TR allowed for detached single-family development. Staff has also included some additional development requirements such as open space, rear-loaded units adjacent to exterior streets, and a height requirement to be consistent with other residential districts recently or concurrently being amended. It is staff's opinion that this would not create any future problems for the development community. In addition, the form-based code in the Highway 9 and Crabapple areas provide the needed tools to develop a townhouse project. The only area of the city that is not within the form-based code areas and would have potential rezoning to a TR district and that's really what we're talking about for this amendment, what it would apply to, is Bethany Bend between Highway 9 and Morris Road. The Planning Commission recommended approving the proposed amendments to the TR district on June 25th, as recommended by the staff, with a couple of minor edits to the development standards which have been included. And so, with that, you have the proposed changes before you for the townhome, and you can see that we took out the references to single-family dwellings because, as we said, the R5A already really responds to the same type of development pattern that was listed in TR. You can find that in the R5A, so they were redundant. So we've cleaned it up. This is just a townhome ordinance, but as I said, it only applies because we've got the form-based code covering most of the areas that allow townhomes with their own development standards and setback controls and whatnot. The only area we're talking about now is down at Bethany Bend, based on our current zoning map. So we did, as you can see, we did change the height requirements to a maximum of 28 feet from average finished grade to the bottom of the roof eave. We've, let's see, we do require a minimum of open space or recreational facilities. For each unit, a minimum of 1,000 square feet of open space shall be required. We have a minimum of 80% of any common wall shall be contiguous with each adjoining unit. And that is to respond to the townhouse developments that we have seen where, to call it a townhome, they've put a wall in between each of the buildings so they connect. And we really didn't think that that was a true townhome. That to us, a townhome needed to have a common wall. So we've tried to define that by this requirement that we say that a minimum of 80% of any common wall should be contiguous with each adjoining unit. So there should be an 80% adjoinment. When units are located on property adjacent to an exterior street, they should provide rear-loaded vehicular access, and the front facade shall face the exterior street of the development. Again, that's so as to not to have these units turn their back to the street. And each unit shall provide 2 off-street parking spaces within the principal structure. So those are the major changes we've made to this ordinance, but certainly open to any questions, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for Kathy on that? Bill?
Kathy, page 2, top of the page 2, 64669, A, the minimum height or maximum height.
Yes.
Boy, I calculated here, so your floor to ceiling height is going to be, it's going to be less than 8 feet. Say you're starting your first floor 2 feet above finished grade, which is pretty common. 1 foot deep joist there, 1 second floor and 1 third floor. There's 5 feet right there. Leaves you 23 feet for floor to ceiling height on 3 floors, so it'd be less than 8 feet clearance.
Robert, did this mean to say 2 stories, or is this something that we need to check into?
We can double check that.
I think that's a point well taken, sir, and we will certainly double check that. I think it's a good point.
Okay. That's all you got? Okay. Matt?
On that stretch of road you're talking about, aren't there some townhomes down there now in existence on that Bethany Bend? And
I'm sorry, what was the question?
There are some townhomes down there now.
Yes, there are.
And the height on those is what?
They're pretty low. They're pretty.
They're below what it used to be below the 40-foot height. Are they around the 28-foot?
I have no idea, but most of them are just a true 2-story. They're not a 3-story. They're just pretty vanilla townhomes, and so.
I mean, I was just curious.
Yeah,
I
but
wanted
we'll double check on this and get back to you for the
just
next
to stay
time.
consistent with what's there. I just was thinking of that.
Well, I think that we were looking to, some of the townhomes can go up to 3 stories, possibly, but let's double check on that.
Okay.
For next week.
Okay, Joe?
Yeah, so my wife has been looking at a lot of these kind of properties lately. A lot of people have interest in them. She's, a real estate agent. And the typical footprint for a townhome right now that they're building is 3 stories. And, where the bottom story houses the garage and a bedroom,
Right.
bathroom kind of thing, and then it goes up another 2 stories from there. So to Bill's point, I don't see how we would make the 28 feet work. So if you guys are going to look at that and see if it was a restriction for 2-story units only, but I would say we have to give the flexibility to have higher stories and heights.
Correct. I mean, we would definitely want a higher floor to ceiling, more than 8 feet. But and I think, again, and we'll double check with Bob too, with the city architect, because he was helping with the height issue, is that, for instance, those types of townhomes with the garage and a bedroom, that could be considered maybe a basement. But and then, like we spoke to earlier, that the basement and the attic isn't included. It's the same definition, but we'll double check on it.
But I was going to say those never have any.
They're not covered. Okay.
Covered. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Point well taken.
Karen, do you have anybody else? Okay. All right, Sudie, if you want to call the next item, if there's any public comment or not.
Next item is discussion of RC 14-08 to amend Article 6, Division 4, R2, Single Family Residential District, and we have a public comment from Mr. Walter Recook.
Yes, Walt Recook, 615 Scarlet Oak Trail, Milton, Georgia. I'm a resident and a business owner. Again, on this R2, I think what we're doing again is if we go down the spreadsheet and look, again, we've got a height situation where it's 2 stories and 28 feet. Again, I just don't think we need to be in the business of height restrictions, especially in the zoning classifications for AG1 or what could have been a CUP. Same thing with the lot width. This one I'm very concerned about. One of the problems you have by you automatically making the lot this wide, you're pretty much doing 2 things to a builder. Number one, their house is not 150 foot wide. Their house is typically going to be somewhere in the area of 60 to 80 feet in width. When you put the turnout, it's somewhere around an extra 20 or 30 feet. Most developments that I see in AG1 are 100 foot in width. It seems to work well, but what happens is when you make it wider, then you're going to have to make that developer, he's going to make the lots less deep. By them making it a lot less deep, you're also going to say the house needs to be moved forward, and then also you preclude yourself from amount of pool area, but in addition, everybody's all concerned about open space. You've then taken a situation where you now have to take and clear that whole 150 foot width and probably all the way back as well. It just is not geometrically the way a house is really built. And by making it wider, I think the intent is, well, we'll make them make bigger lots. Well, I really think that that's not something that really needs to be done. Again, when we looked at anybody filing for CUP, they did not ask for larger widths of lots. So I am not sure where this came from. Same thing with lot frontage. Nothing's changed there. Heated area. There's nothing there. Minimum setbacks. Again, I'm not sure why we have to have any dimension in particular for the perimeter setback, especially if you're going to be asking for this rural view shed. That in itself is going to require what the minimum setback's going to be, and I think that's going to determine that, so why even mention that? Front yard setback being 20, again, I think that's fine. Side yard setback, again, I just don't know why that's being changed to 50 feet between structures and not less than 10 feet from the property line. Again, I think 25 worked fine. Minimum side yard is 30. rear yard 40. Again, I don't have a problem, but then again, we come back to this lot coverage, 20%. Again, it just does not seem to make sense. The open space, again, I'm always of the opinion on open space. What are you using it for? And they're saying, well, it can't be linear. It has to be something that you can use. Well, if I have a 20-acre subdivision, and I've got to dedicate 550 square feet per unit, that's only going to generate 11,000 square feet. 11,000 square feet, I can't even build a pool on that in a clubhouse in a parking lot. So it really doesn't help a lot. Even with the 20 acres, and I have to now do 1,000, it's 21,000 square feet, which is really less than half an acre. Again, how can you build much of a pool or anything else? And again, it's per acre, not by unit. The one above is by unit. This one says by acre. The gang mailbox, I'll just tell you, until the federal government requires me and backs me up to the wall, I wouldn't put anything in our codes referencing gang boxes. I think it's just too early in the game to make that a requirement. Let's let them do the direction, and we may find out that under public safety, can you imagine public safety trying to find some of these houses with no mailbox and address in front of that house? You're going to have a real problem. If I was going to be directing something like this, then I'd also be directing how mail or some kind of post or something's going to have to be located in front of each house at the driveway so that firemen and police be able to tell what that driveway goes to. I mean, that's what you really use that mailbox for in addition to getting mail. It's just ridiculous. Rural view shed, again, I don't quite understand what the big deal on that is, but if that's something that the council really wants, that's fine. And then architectural review, I'm strongly against that. I think if you want to say the architect can review the rear of the building, but why he has to review the whole house, again, I'm of freedom of choice. You know, if I own or buy a house that's going to be over $600,000 or $700,000, why am I having somebody from the city tell me what my house has to look like in the front when the only thing you should be concerned about is what's looking at the back, if that's what you're really concerned about for people seeing it from the street? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And lastly, back to that CUP issue, if I wanted to build a clubhouse in a community, I wanted to build a jockey club that had a stable and I serve food or drinks, or I wanted to do something else within a community that had some other uses besides just purely residential, again, I would have to come up with another zoning classification besides CUP to do it. Again, I just think we're kind of rushing it. I think I understand why the citizens were complaining, because they thought that we could put commercial and all kind of things. I think if it was me, I'd go back to AG1. I would change AG1 to show that the front yard setback, rear yard setbacks, side yard setbacks for interior streets, that houses could be moved up closer, instead of trying to create a whole new RR zoning. And then you take care of the problem. Just change AG1 to say, here's what the setbacks have to be on a minor street, not on an outside street, not on a street like you have on Freemanville Road or anything like that. I'm not asking for changes like that. But on an interior street, just change AG1 to allow interior streets to have some of these differences to move the houses up closer. That, to me, would be the simplest solution. You no longer have to have people file CUPs or R2s or any of these things. I think majority of the cases, you get most developers agreeing to do that. A developer seeing this, they would never file for an R2, never, or RR or whatever this is called. Why would I file for this? What benefit? How does that help me be more flexible? It's hardly worth anything, because I'd have to give up more land, I'd have to give up more rights, and I have to have more people telling me what to do. I just go back to AG1 and I work it out. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Kathy.
Thank you. The proposed amendment to the R2 single-family residential district is in response to the zoning moratorium that is currently in place. First, staff has recommended that a new zoning district, RR, rural residential district, replace the existing R2, which is single-family residential district. The existing district is similar to the AG1 district, with the exception of requiring smaller side and rear minimum yard setbacks. It is staff's opinion that this newly created district will be a compromise between the proposed deleted CUP and the AG1 district as discussed in the staff memo previously. Staff has included a comparison chart to illustrate the differences between the RR, CUP, and AG1 districts for your review. And do you have the chart? Is that?
I found the chart, yes.
Okay.
It was in the July 7th agenda.
Excellent, thank you. The proposed RR district development standards allow the developer to have flexibility in designing the development. For example, if there is a specimen tree or a problem with percolation of the property for septic, the house placement can be moved as close as 10 feet from the side property line, but the adjacent lot must provide a minimum of 40 feet for a total building separation of 50 feet, which is consistent with a traditional AG1 minimum 25-foot setback for each lot. For front and rear minimum setbacks, staff has proposed 20 feet and 40 feet respectively. To ensure protection of adjacent developments or lots, a 50-foot perimeter setback is required. With this flexibility, but not as flexible as the CUP district, staff believes a development can be constructed that further preserves trees, tree lines, or other significant natural features of the property. Another addition to the proposed district is the rear view shed and minimum lot coverage not to exceed 20%. Lastly, staff has recommended that open space or recreational facilities be required based on the size of the development. The Planning Commission recommended approving the proposed amendment to the R2 district by creating a new RR district on June 25th, as recommended by staff with a couple of minor edits to the development standards.
Okay.
Open for questions.
Yeah.
And Kathy, I'm just trying to get a big picture here as well. I mean, this is basically to replace the R2 and the CUP that we had, the RR, right?
That's correct. That's
And
right.
How much of our land acreage is R2 right now, just from a perspective? Just curious.
Robin, go ahead.
There's very little that's zoned R2. It's
Right.
very, very small amount. That's why we were looking to kind of replace, basically eradicate any future zonings, because I've never had a request in 7 years, and there's really hardly any out there, even previous in Fulton County.
And as we mentioned, though, the R4A is pretty much like an R2. So if anyone was interested in doing that type of density, they would be directed to the R4A. So we thought that was a good substitution here.
So this is just basic. So again, just we're not replacing AG1 with this. This is just for an example of anybody that wanted the CUP, they can do this instead.
That's right. It's a different new tool in the toolbox.
So in case, and the whole purpose of going away from, changing the CUP and NEP, but obviously we're considering that developers are buying land and then trying to change the lots in there because of the topography issues that they may have. So the RR would then be the replacement for that if that was the way they wanted to go.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
Am I saying that correctly? Okay, just making sure.
Bill, we clear?
I'm still not clear. Are we saying we're going to rename R2 to be
Yes.
RR?
Right, so what you have in front of you, it still preserves the R2 district standards, but it has that caveat about, no more after a certain date. I think it's July 21st if you all do approve this. The version you have should have that, correct?
Takes it out of use.
It takes
Yeah,
it
takes
out of use, and then we have a new section, Division 4A, which starts the new RR and all the standards. So we had to preserve, again, like the CUP and the NUP, we had to preserve those district standards just for those few pieces. So.
Okay.
One other point.
Sure.
Mr. Rico brought it up about house numbers. If we were to go to kiosk mailboxes, at some point in time, I'd like to review our code on house numbers and building numbers. particularly commercial buildings. I know Forsyth County has a code specifically addressing size of building numbers and where they're to be placed on buildings. And I think if you go up and down Highway 9 here in particular, you're going to find a smattering of anything and everything. I think from a public safety standpoint, fire department, police department, I think it's be a good idea to address that again.
I'll take that one. I'll take that one in the Senate.
Okay. Karen?
And if I can, just before we move on, just while Bill was talking there, I see here in that 64466, you probably spotted it 2A, where we talk about height regulations. It talks about that 28 feet related to 2 stories. So there's a disconnect between how many stories that 28 feet is supposed to be.
14-foot.
I don't know if I could, 7-foot ceilings, I might brush my head against it. So we'll take a look, but I think that's probably what the problem is it was supposed to be 2 stories. Yeah. So, sorry, I just caught that when you were talking.
Okay. Karen?
What exactly does minimum development frontage mean? I know what minimum lot width at building line means. What's minimum development frontage?
So if you had 40 acres and you would need to have at least, what did I say, 150?
So basically you don't have flagged subdivisions.
Right. And so it would allow for 50 feet on either side to have, and that's what our development standards requires for a new road, is to have 50 feet on each side of a new road adjacent to residential. So you don't have a road right against a subdivision.
Okay, that makes sense.
Sounds like a pending case.
That's right.
I have to agree a little bit with Walt in the fact that we're telling people that if they want a little bit different setbacks, they have to jump through about 20 hoops. The ones that I have the problems with are the 2 stories, 28 feet in height. I don't think we ought to be limiting that. If people want to live in the manor, a thing that looks like the manor, they ought to be able to live in there. And as long as the rest of us don't see it when we drive down public streets, I don't think it really matters. I mean, that's their decision. I have a problem with the rural view shed part of it. I'm not real sure how that was going to work as far as the entrance to the subdivision and, whether or not things are just going to be left totally unkept. I'd rather it be a natural view shed than a one that's completely. I'd rather have one that looks like it's been kept up, but looks like it's in keeping with the area, rather than one that's nothing but kudzu, which kudzu is something that's pretty natural up in Milton. I disagree with the architectural review. I don't think for residential units we ought to be telling people what the front and back and sides of their house look like, and whether or not they can, have a kid's playground set in the back, which would be something that could be seen from a street. I think we're overstepping things, and I disagree with the lot coverage not to exceed 20%. I just think that's a little bit. I think we're being a little bit too restrictive. I think we're trying to get everybody to fit in little boxes.
What about the rest of the council on those points Karen made? Joe?
I would agree that the controlling factor in most of this is the lot size, and we're already specifying a lot size of 1 acre, minimum lot size. So, I understand what we're trying to do with the 150-foot lot width and the frontage and stuff like that, but to me it makes more sense to just let the developer sort of, put the lots in as they need to be put in, and that's really going to dictate what kind of house can be put where and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I'm a little bit, I was agreeing with Karen and with Mr. Riku both that we probably don't need to be too descriptive in that way. Restrictive.
Okay, to me it sounds like.
One thing I do want to say, just in response to that, and it'll be something we need to look at if we need to look at it, but this whole concept of this rural view shed and the undisturbed distance from the right-of-way to this new proposed buffer, that is something that is included in the rural overlay that was adopted by the council last June. So to some degree, that's already in the code in this most recent overlay. So we'll need to, if this triggering a discussion like that, I just want you to be mindful that might mean we have to look back at a different document that at this point has already been adopted.
But if we make this thing here so restricted that no developer's ever going to go ask for it, which I believe is what we've done here, because if they know they're going to have every house that faces a exterior street go through an architectural review and everything else, they're not going to fool with all that. They're just going to say, forget it. So, they'll just go into the other bucket. They'll go into just the AG1 bucket, and they'll just find a way to make it work and forget about the things rather than go through all the hoops that we're asking them to go to. So I don't think it's going to accomplish what we want.
And I don't disagree with you. I just wanted to highlight the fact that if we're going to change that direction somewhat, we've got to go back and look at something that we looked at last month. And
I think we ought to change the AG1 to an extent so that we can do something with the rural view shed, but I just don't think it ought to be the AG1 and this ought to be consistent, and they shouldn't be quite this restrictive.
Okay.
Yeah, and my thought, mine's going to be a little different from Karen's in this. Obviously the concern for the community was that developers would take AG1, buy it with the topography, and then try to change it to get more homes on it, and being able to adjust it was that. I wouldn't mind if they didn't do this and did go to AG1, but kept it on the topography which they bought. So if they were buying land that they knew that they were buying, then they should be able to make that work under the restrictions and the guise of what the community wanted, which I think was the intent in our doing this. So I'm not as concerned about this as I am is that the developers recognize that they buy AG1, they got AG1, and they stick with that. And I think that's the way we're trying to go with this, and that's the statement I think needs to be said here.
So I just want to make sure I capture what I think you said. So
what I'm saying is I don't have a problem with what we have here because I think the intent is right for that. If developers, the reason why we did this in the first place was because developers were asking for too many CUPs or NUPs, aside from the spirit of which those were intended. And so, we had AG1 zoning in place, and that AG1 zoning was what we want more people to do on that end. But what was happening was because of certain topography and things like that, more lots were being asked for. And those additional lots are being asked for through the CUP and the NUP. So in order to be able to adjust for that, we try to make a different way of doing things so that if a developer taking risk, buying a lot, knows what he's getting with that lot and then hopes to ask more when he knows what he bought to begin with, or he should have, that should be his own risk, not necessarily ours for him asking for rezoning. So that's.
So if I follow you correctly, you're
I'm
almost
fine
in a
with what
position
we
that
have
it's
here.
fine that somebody would fall back into an AG1.
Yes.
So long as they built it to the AG1 standard.
Exactly.
And see, where I disagree is I do not believe that they were asking for the CUP to try to get more lots. I believe they were asking for the CUP to try to have the houses look best on the lots and on the landscape as it currently was. If it was better to move them forward or whatever, I live in a CUP subdivision because it happens to be gated, so it had to be a CUP. But I believe that they were not asking for the CUP or an NUP to try to get more lots. It was the same number of lots, but to try to have them look more in keeping with the rural character of the area, they were asking for the CUP.
I understand both positions.
Yeah. As we move forward with this, that's our staff.
To some degree, I guess I'd look for if we have enough to give some direction tonight. I don't know, with a couple members out, maybe we don't, but obviously we'll bring this back forward next week, and that doesn't mean it necessarily has to adopt next week. But it's advertised, so it has to come forward. If you could, I guess to some degree, summarize whether the general feel of the council at this point, maybe we just do generalities, is that this is an overly restrictive RR designation, or conversely that it's reasonably restrictive with maybe some minor tweaks. That would help me, I guess, understand the order of magnitude as to how far off we are at this point.
Let me go back to Karen just because she brought up the points, and I think the majority here are in agreement with that. But do you want to kind of restate your concerns, Karen, and then if there's one or two we want to
My
tweak or not,
concerns are with, first was with the 28-foot height maximum.
While we're at it, let's just talk about that. What's the council's feeling on that?
I mean, I'm open with that being raised. I don't have a problem with that at all. I wasn't so concerned about the height of the property as I was for the number of lots.
Okay, well, yeah, well, let's just talk, we're just talking about the height now.
Yeah.
Bill, I think you brought that up too, so you're probably okay with increasing the height or not having that restriction, or?
Well, they're calling for 2 stories with a maximum of 28 feet.
And I think that was to cover, if it were 3 stories, that wouldn't.
Yeah, that's the average elevation of the 4 elevations, and it goes up to the bottom of the eaves. So
Right.
you could still have an attic level, and then you could still have a basement.
But that's for 2 stories above grade that we're talking about.
Correct.
I think that's pretty excessive. That's very liberal. You could essentially get 2 floors with 13-foot floor-to-ceiling clearance.
Joe?
I say we should.
I don't know who would ever build a house with those proportions, but.
But you could never have a 3-story house under this, correct?
Well,
Was
you could
that
have the
ba-
3rd story in the attic
In the attic.
with dormers and everything else.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah.
So I think to Bill's point, anything he's saying, this is particular to a 2-story above grade, 2 floors. Karen brought up earlier, what if somebody wanted to have 3 stories above floors plus an attic? I don't know, Joe, what?
If we're talking about the townhome restriction, then I think we should just say 3 stories and leave it at that. I don't think we need to get into the number of feet or anything. I think it should be a story restriction.
It's a good way to deal with it.
I'll say another comment as well. On this particular issue too, I think I really, I know where we're going on this. I think that the incentives that we're trying to do, I'm just thinking big picture of what we're doing with everything here too. In this particular thing I'm looking at, I really think that the incentives that we're trying to create from the impact fees, things like that, I think will drive more of what we want than just putting the restrictions on so many things. And I'm taking a little bit back from what I said earlier, but the CUP district that we had being misused, in my mind, maybe the rural residential district we could have here would be part of that incentive structure to get it more towards the AG1. And I'm just trying to think philosophically here what we would do in this case. If the community is worried about CUPs and NUPs, how do we then incentivize people to do it the right way? And I guess I'm just asking the question generally. If we do this, what would be our consequences? If we don't, what would be our consequences? And again, I just want to make sure that our developers know that if they're buying an AG1 property, that was the primary intent that we had. How do we make sure that we want them to do that? And I'm just asking a question. I'm having a dialogue here.
All right, but as we're going through, let's try to somewhat put this height restriction to bed or not. I think, Karen, you do not like the 28 feet.
I just feel like we're being too restrictive. I just feel like people have a right to an extent to have whatever kind of house they want to, and that we shouldn't be telling them that they all have to live in houses that look alike.
What's, and I've heard other points on that too. What is staff, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, we thought that was adequate size, and I guess what we're sorely missing is our city architect, because he really, I think, very eloquently defended that number. So we can certainly have that discussion at the next meeting if you'd like, or we could come in with some alternatives to that as well.
Let me suggest, because we're not in a position right now. We're not making decisions tonight, anyways. We're just kind of discussing them. We do know that that's a point that needs to be discussed.
Yep.
At our next meeting, or that'll be a point that will either need to be included or not. So that is something that be prepared to discuss, and council will be prepared to think about it through and ask questions between now and then, or be ready to discuss it at the next meeting.
I think, if we go and just go to the high level of the lens we were looking through and trying to create this, it was the fact that there was an abundance of those CUPs applications that were coming in. And kind of the idea with this was that, yes, it was designed to be a fairly restrictive zoning designation, but it was restrictive in trying to capture some of the things that we were hearing were not liked about the CUP. It was trying to capture those things and put some guidelines to them so that if they were going to get built in a certain way, they'd get built in a way that was okay. So that was I think the lens we tried to look through. I don't know that we necessarily hit the target is what I'm hearing, but I think we could still get there. But I think we're probably going to have the city architect here and have some much further discussion.
I think we also ought to, under just the AG1, change it so that, I don't know if there's a way to change it so that if it's a subdivision that we could require some open space and everything. To me, if you've got any kind of pond or something in the subdivision, you ought to have, and the subdivision is liable for the maintenance of it, there ought to be an area adjacent to it that is available to everybody in the subdivision. So I don't know, and I know with AG1s they don't have to come before us, so I don't know if we can make adjustments to it, because I like the fact that we require a certain amount of open space or recreational facilities. I think we ought to do that with every zoning category we have, if we're really going to preserve it.
Yeah.
And just, again, I think this is all one small part of the whole big picture too, that we're going to have conservation subdivisions come before us. We're going to have other quivers in our tool come before us with regards to this. This is just one overall piece to reach that objective in a very small part of our overall plan. Am I saying that right? This is just one piece, right? The big picture that we're doing. So it's we have AG1. We can change AG1. But then again, if we're trying to do conservation subdivisions, that can provide that option for what we're talking about versus AG1. So, I'm just wondering if you have an AG1 system and a developer comes in and tries to misuse that with a CUP, my only question is this rural residential district going to achieve that objective mainly on lot size and lot use than it would for what we currently had in the process that we didn't work? I just want to make sure that as a council, we think that whether or not this achieves that objective for misuse of number of lots on a piece of property. And that's my main concern. And I'll look at that and think about that before we come to a vote next week.
What was the main reason that people were requesting the CUP as opposed to just developing under AG1?
They typically ask for a much narrower side setback and a front. I think sometimes it was to deal with topography. Sometimes it had to deal with septic, drainage issues. A lot of the same issues that Mr. Recook spoke to. Yes.
So really, it was setbacks, usually either front or
side
setbacks, more so than trying to get more lots in more density, a greater number of lots in a development.
Right. For example, one of the petitions that had come was North Birmingham Estates. It was north of the Birmingham Corners. Once they withdrew, the next day they came in with the land development permit for AG1. So they basically yielded the same number of lots, if not one less. So that's just an example that.
So they weren't trying to. I know the perception was people were using the CUP to get a higher density, but that really is not the case. They were just really, for the most part, they weren't trying to get a higher density. They were just trying to position the residents
That's
a little
correct.
different on the lots.
That was our experience.
Make a better development.
Okay, so that's important. So if they had, I'm just trying to think, because I've heard of situations where development would have 50 acres, but because of topography, they could only put 30 homes on it. If they wanted to do a CUP, then they could put in 40. And is that not true?
That has not been our experience. Robin, you can also weigh in on that. But
no, I think there would never be that percentage increase. If you had 50 lots, for example, the example I made, they were very tight. They were exactly 1 acre postage stamps it's not really what we wanted to see. It was a very beautiful piece of property, and they basically put as many lots as possible. But in the end, when they went to AG1, they still pretty much yielded the same number of lots. They might have, they could maybe have one more lot out of 50 or 60 acres, but that's one more lot. But even in that circumstance, they didn't yield more with their CUP than they did with their AG1.
Okay, I'm gonna, we've gotten good comments from the public. We're getting good comments from council. We're kind of all over the board here. I'm gonna suggest, and with approval from, or buy-in from our staff, if we could give them a little time to look at this, and we may want to have another work session on this with some more information, and postpone at this next meeting.
Yeah, I think what I'd like to do is this comes forward because it's advertised at the next meeting, but also coming forward at the next meeting is a public hearing and a request to extend the moratorium until these are done, because we were nearing the expiration. If these had passed pretty quickly, as in their current form, I would have recommended that we then just allow the moratorium to lapse. After tonight's discussion, that's not going to be my recommendation, and it's going to be that we defer these items at the meeting to the next work session, and also that we allow that moratorium to continue. That way I can do a couple of things. Number one is I can bring this back with a little bit more thought, but I also really need to look at this overlay that was adopted in June and make sure that I don't ask you to take an action in a council meeting that's going to create a conflict in our code, because that's a bad place to be. I want to make sure that some of these changes that I think you're asking for at this point, I can bring those forward, but I'll bring them in parallel with that overlay again, so that we don't leave ourselves a loophole or create one for ourselves in our zoning code. So if you're okay with that, that'll be kind of our intended course, at least on this moving forward.
Okay. You guys all right with that? Okay. All right, do we, anybody else have anything else, or we want
Oh, we have
to?
one
We got one more item, so do we have some public comment on that one?
We do not. Then the last item of the evening, discussion of RZ 14-09 to amend Article 6, Division 5, R2A, Single Family Residential District. Ms. Kathy Field.
Thank you. The Community Development Department recommends withdrawal of the proposed text amendment based on the fact there is not a need to amend the zoning district. It was inadvertently included in the districts under the zoning moratorium currently in place. And so we would respectfully ask that it be taken out of consideration.
Any questions on that? Everybody okay with that?
Yeah, I wouldn't argue that.
All right. Okay. And leave that off unless staff, do you have anything else, or?
No, I think I think I've got generally the sense that we'll take a look at it through a lens of being less restrictive and see where that goes, and that's the purpose of these work sessions. So great discussion. I appreciate the feedback, and we'll be back in front of you with a different document in about a month.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, everybody.